And here we go. All right, welcome to episode number 33 of You Had Me at Halo, where we talk about one of gaming's most storied franchises. So, about a year and a half ago, a group of us decided to start a podcast, and it was for our adoration of this particular franchise. Something that, this is a franchise that brings a lot of people together for a lot of different reasons. And here we are now, finally on the precipice of the release of Halo Infinite. And one of the things that we really want to cover in some more detail than what we've talked about in previous podcasts is more about the story. And even though we understand that Halo Infinite is going to be a soft reboot of the franchise, we do know that this franchise can be enriched if you do come in with more of an understanding of what's going on. So now, as somebody who came to this franchise who really adored it more for the gameplay and the game elements and didn't get into a lot of the book background and things like in some of the extended lore, myself, I have a lot of questions that kind of pop up as they've been alluding to things. And that is why we have this panel of experts with us today. So I am going to be the dumb on the panel. and the rest of these guys are the lore experts. Everybody else here has read the extended material, at least some of it.
Amanda's read one book, the one that we did the podcast on. Okay. So we'll be teaching you too.
Okay, cool. That's cool. So it's going to be interesting. So we'll be here to kind of ask questions, and then we'll turn it over to the rest of you to sort of answer them. And this is going to be pretty exciting because I've started to delve into it a little bit, and there is a lot of interesting lore that they build on. And for somebody who does like extended universes, sci-fi, there are some really cool elements that they haven't really gone in depth within the game. So we'll talk about that because we do suspect that even though you don't need it, it will enrich your experience. But before we get into that, it's definitely not going to hurt. But before we get into all of that, let's go ahead and introduce everybody. So let's go ahead and start with our very special guest, Spartan Amanda, aka Mandala. Did I get that right?
Mandala.
Mm-hmm. Mandala. All right. Well, welcome back. I know you were on the book podcast, but welcome back and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
Next up, we got Spartan Mike, aka Mr. Kage Maru. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, going good. Hello.
And then we have Spartan Jesse, aka Mr. Don Cabeza.
Hello, everyone. Am I excited about Halo Infinite.
Yeah, it's pretty much the only thing that's been happening in our house for the last
2 days.
Jesse,
Sure.
that is well, we can't say anything else about that. So
I am the one reviewing it. I can just
you can
say that broadly.
All right.
Soul Blazers is doing our multiplayer too, so you can look forward to that at launch.
Next up, we got Spartan Daniel, aka Mr. Nadian. How's it going, Daniel?
It's all right. Just glad to be here, guys. And Amanda.
Talking some lore.
Indeed.
All right, and finally, as your host today, Spartan Abe, aka One Bad Mother. All right, so how
you doing, Abe?
Oh, I'm super. Thanks for asking. All right, so this is going to be a different kind of show. Generally, I like to give my opinions about a lot of things, but that's not what today's really about. We really want to just delve into people who know stuff. And,
AKA not me.
who can do more than talk about how many hours they played or keep talking about the sandbox. But today will not be the show for that. But Jesse, I want to start off with you. I really want you to just kind of give people like a quick background. I think most people who probably turn into this show, most of them probably have played the games, and know the general story of Bungie's Halos and things like that. But even with Bungie's Halos, there is some background to some of the things that happen there, and I thought maybe you could try to just kind of, we won't spend a lot of the show on this, but just kind of help set the table, because I think it is going to help us as we try to get them caught up on what was happening in episodes 4 and 5, as well as some of the extended materials and the backgrounds that maybe a lot of people may have missed within the terminal. So I'll start off with you, Jesse, and you can kind of set that up for us.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone knows the base story. Everyone knows the flood. What 343 really started to do was give that backstory of who were the Forerunners, what are the flood, like, because so much of Halo 1, 2, and 3 was the Human Covenant War. And you go through all of that, and it's Master Chief and Cortana together and apart quite a bit, and, their relationship as, she is this clone of Dr. Halsey, who made all the Spartans. She is kind of human. Like, she's got emotions and stuff, and Chief gets so used to always having her in his head that, like they almost become, that symbiotic one. And 4 and 5 really ended up being quite a bit about that. So they would go back into the Forerunners, and you met the Didact, but at its core, it was always what's going on between Chief and Cortana, like both of them, in their soul. Because there's these huge things all happening around, but what is the main story of Halo? And it's like she said in the campaign overview, it's the story of Chief and Cortana. And this one, Halo Infinite, we're going into with she's supposedly been deleted by what we assume is a more kept in check copy of Halsey's brain that they're calling the weapon. What happened to her? Again, Chief and Cortana is sort of the heart and soul of the game, but it's taking place in an area that has previously only been in the books, and it's been in the books in a very big way called Zeta Halo. Introduced during the Forerunner trilogy, like most of the big stuff happens on that ring. So learning what that history is, the Forerunners, the Flood, the Precursors, what are they? Knowing all of that stuff, it does give you a lot of flavor for Halo Infinite that, we all think it helps add to it. Yeah. From what I've seen from the previews and talking with John and stuff, it's not 100% necessary. Like could be the critique of 4 with the easily missable terminals that actually did give you the context. You just would miss them, and then they would, even if you found it, it pulled you out of the game.
It was like Easter eggs. It's like you had to try and find them, which is weird. Why would you have to seek out the lore like that?
Well, yeah, and three, and I mean, the Bungie Halos did that a lot too, but whereas the Bungie Halos were a lot more vague, and they were just kind of sprinkles of lore and mythic value. At least with 4s, they were, if you watch them, you understood.
Yeah, they're direct.
Who the Forerunner. Yeah, you understood who the Forerunner were. You understood, generally how the Flood came to be and why the Forerunner and Human War started. You understood everything that kind of led up to why the Librarian is the way she is and why the Didact is the way he is, in terms of the protagonist-antagonist relationship there.
And even when you get like the Didact, ISO Didact, and it got pretty complicated in that trilogy, and the middle of that trilogy was very dry and lore heavy. The type of thing where you might skim over it in rereadings because the beginning and ending are stronger, but there really is just so much that just it adds to that game in a way that they hadn't really done before, because the way it was Microsoft building up this huge lore base that Bungie then mostly ignored in the games, because they were just like, he's the last Spartan, there's no other ones. I don't care if you said that blue team all lived in these books, they're all dead to us in these games. And eventually, even with Reach, they went back and they changed the lore so that it was like half of Cortana on the planet and half fighting the Covenant, stuff. There was always a push and pull, where with 343 it's much more felt like an actual cohesive thing. Except for with 4, terminals should have been cutscenes that were just part of a mission. It would have been better overall, and then have terminals that are something more side. And then 5 was an overcorrection on people being annoyed at the perceived obtuseness of 4 because you could miss so much.
Right.
Now, I did want to really quick before we kind of miss it, because I think with the overall, like looking back on the originals, like we said, we won't recap the story that's in the games and the originals, but I do think One of the things that 343's done is they or in some of the extended materials has done is they really kind of built some of those core elements that a lot of people don't know. Like Cortana, the Flood, the Rings. There's a lot of backstory that I think even if you played those games over and over the way I have over the years, you still don't know that. So, I guess we'll start with the Cortana. And Daniel, I know you know some backstory on this, or that's something that you've mentioned. So I want to just let you kind of expound on Cortana, and then we'll kind of go back over some of the other elements too.
In relation to like 4 and beyond, I assume.
Yeah, like what makes her unique, different for people who really don't know? Because I think for me, it was like when I played the games initially, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is an AI, and for me, nothing really. It wasn't obvious that she was different or special or something that's supposed to help win the war or whatever. I don't think that was very obvious. So maybe you can kind of expound on that.
Yeah, so I mean, Cortana was at the time the only, and I think still to this day, the only AI to be created from human tissue. And so that, in the kind of MacGuffin-ish version in the Halo lore, it
was living tissue though, right? Not human tissue, because their other ones were done on deceased humans, weren't they?
Right. Thank you. Yes, it's living tissue from Dr. Halsey from her. So, that was their like way of separating her from others. But like every AI in that universe, they are programmed with a predetermined lifespan, not too dissimilar from replicants in Blade Runner, right? Except the difference here is that they become rampant, and so they slowly become, or if they are not decommissioned, they slowly become insane and start wreaking havoc, because the AI in the Halo series are far more advanced than what most sci-fi have in AI. They're still dictated by protocols and limitations, whereas the AI in here are far more like like multiple human beings worth of processing powers, brains, and all that kind of stuff. So with 4, we wake up after after her slide into rampancy has already started, and so that's per Jesse, like he was saying, with there's all these moving parts in 4, but ultimately the main point of the the entire story for Chief is trying to get Cortana back to Halsey to try to find a way to reverse that rampancy, to reverse that slide into deterioration. And obviously we know that doesn't happen, but with what we see in 5, what I always tell people, because I always this was kind of like headcanon for me, and I think we're probably going to see it actually confirmed in Infinite, was that the version of Cortana that we saw in 5 was not necessarily our Cortana, because at the end of 4, she enters the domain, which is anybody who knows IT, it's just what you think of Active Directory or a domain for the Forerunner, just massively expanded and on crack. And so she enters in there,
like
but as
www.cortana.com.
Right.
Like her own
exactly.
special area.
But it's like it's machine learning too, because it's constantly changing bits and all that kind of stuff. And if we remember at the end of 4, when she enters the domain, she's already starting to split into thousands of personalities. And so my theory was always that the version of 5, or the version of Cortana we saw in 5, was just the dominant form that was able to, quote unquote, find a physical manifestation. But there is still a great possibility that the Cortana that we know, or the majority of those bits of her, are still present in the domain, because the domain, as Jesse will tell you too, the Forerunner didn't understand it completely, neither do we. So it's like one of those, like, right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like it's a weird thing, because it's so nebulous, where it's galaxy spanning, like subspace. They don't understand how it works. They just know that at some point of their life they got connected to it.
Right. It's similar to the Citadel and the mass relays with the Prometheans in Mass Effect, right? I mean, obviously those were built by the Reapers, and we know why, but they're still, even the the loric justification and explanation is still kind of hazy, and that's the same thing with the domain. So the domain is kind of this space magic in a way.
Space magic that when they fired the rings 100,000 years ago nearly destroyed the domain because it messed up space so much, and that's why there hasn't really been a connection to it for anything until Cortana connected to it.
Right, because she's classified as an Insula AI, and that can get into the weeds really quickly. But
sorry, I cut you off, Mike.
Am I remembering correct? Like, did the Precursor make the domain? Precursors, didn't they?
I don't know if it was ever directly stated.
Yeah,
I thought they used it though. Like that wasn't that something?
Yes, it was one of those always there things almost.
So should we talk about that? I think that's a good transition actually. So because people probably heard that, and if it would have been like myself until I started looking into this stuff. Yeah, what's a precursor? So and really I think starting with all that will help us better understand the flood and the rings as well. So I mean I think all that stuff is pretty joined together pretty well. So who Jesse, would you like to continue on? Maybe start with
roll in with me.
Yeah, you guys, all you guys. I'm just letting you kind
pretty
of
much.
This one.
So the way the whole story went with Halo was there were the thing they added in 4 really lore wise in the lead up to 4 was that humanity was actually a very long spacefaring race. 100,000 years ago, ran into the flood. They didn't know what it was. They just knew it was infecting everything and killing it, and they were constantly trying to outrun it. Though for some reason the flood wasn't infecting them directly, but everything around them it was infecting them, but never humanity. The thing you end up learning in the books is that the flood are essentially the pissed off remains of the atomized precursors, and those spores contain all their rage at the Forerunners, who they created. But then the Forerunners eventually decided that the whole big thing for the Precursors and the Forerunners eventually trying to give to humanity. Well, one of them trying to give it to what's called the Mantle of Responsibility. And it's like, we're the strongest. We have to make sure the galaxy doesn't fall into disrepair and life dies away. So the Precursors were just super old race number 1. And they created things, including the Forerunners. Eventually, after millions of years, the Forerunners, who have that body armor you'd see the Didact wearing in 4, that can help them live for incredibly long periods of time, millions of years, because they go through like a whole mutation process and stuff. It gets really, there's a lot to it, and it's a very good trilogy, and I hope we do it someday. I might read summarizations of book number 2 a bit, but 1 and 3 I'll definitely reread the entirety of. But yeah, so the Precursors created the Forerunners. Forerunners say, up yours, and eventually we want the Mantle. Kill all but 1 Precursor that we know of. Yeah, the Primordial is like the big connection to Zeta Halo, because Zeta Halo is where Halo Infinite's taking place. As far as we know, where I would imagine where a lot of future content is going to take place, because they've got it built out and it's nice and fast to do stuff there. So after beating the humans, the Forerunners then reverted us back to hunter-gatherers, tossed us on Earth as well as on places like Zeta Halo, where there were ancient humans, which were, as Mike was talking about in our pre-show, like if you look at the very first initial reveal, there's some hieroglyphs in a cave. Like, that would make sense because they were reverted to hunter-gatherers, painting in a cave, that type of stuff. Just a callback to our actual.
And they were sent back to Earth, right? Or were they sent back? Okay.
So they were. Yeah, Earth was the chosen. Yeah.
So basically, we would think about it like when cavemen started, that was all the Forerunners. If we were to think about our universe and that. Yeah.
So after the Halo rings were fired 100,000 years ago, then they had their ships that were set to reseed planets, because everything was wiped out except for the inside of the Halo rings. So that's actually what Halo rings are for, which was for studying the flood, studying on Zeta Halo. Yeah, but they were giant arcs of life. They have all the DNA, everything they needed, which we actually saw in a lot of the previews this week. those silexes, which are like the DNA and seemingly with the Harbinger, because there's an open one and she's literally just there. They just kept her, whatever the hell she is, inside one of them for who knows how long. But yeah, so their entire job is to reseed life in the galaxy after they, kill everything to stop the flood from growing. And the flood were essentially controlled by the primordial, because he is the last part of that race. And by the end, he's like, haha, eat shit, humanity. And then humanity can start getting taken over by the flood, which is why we see it in the Halo series.
Right.
Oh, go on.
Go ahead, Mike.
Just real quick, the one thing that I'd add about the primordial is that when he disintegrated, his essence went into the flood, and so basically, like any grave, he was basically like the first grave mind, as long as the last precursor, because so any new formed grave mind that forms like the one we saw in Halo 2 has his essence. That's why he talks about the history and the knowledge that he has, because the precursors have the knowledge from like the beginning, because they were the creators. And so
and that's really interesting, because because this caught me by surprise, because when you play the original Halos, you just think about the flood as like just some dumb weapon, right? Basically,
right. You think of like the alien xenomorph,
right? But really they are. So when you kind of just think about what you just said there, that the primordial is part of all the grave minds, and the grave minds kind of control the flood. That means that number one race that controlled the whole universe is kind of implanted in the flood that you end up fighting, right? Or am I wrong on that? Okay,
yeah.
So that's
it's actually trying to kill all of life at this point.
Yeah, because they got taken over by the Forerunners, so they're just pissed forever.
Right, and in one of the terminals in Halo 4, like you see, the librarian recounts the events that when humanity was encroaching on their territories, when they were fleeing, and they saw it as a movement of aggression. It really wasn't. It was they were trying to escape, because they were trying to escape from the flood, because at that point, that's when the primordial had that we're past the point of experimentation on the Palace of Pain. We're to the point where the flood infects literally every living tissue, and so that's why the Prometheans were created. Was basically their attempt to make Forerunners to make themselves immune from being overtaken by the flood by digitizing their bodies, their minds into a mechanical form. But as we know, that did not. It succeeded in preventing infection, but it corrupted the individual. So at that point, they were no longer who they were.
Yeah, like if you remember that horrific cutscene in Halo 4 when he uses the big ass thing on
the composer
the composer on the space station, and everyone just melts apart as he's digitizing them, and that's why Cortana can hear it, because they're literally being turned into ones and zeros, and she's like, oh, Jesus Christ, it's really nasty.
So because those, and this is, and I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, because I think we got to cover both. You mentioned House of Pain, and I think for a lot of people that probably don't know what that is, but also talking about the Prometheans, which I hate to fight, and I'm glad I'm not going to have to fight them. But the backstory of them is actually kind of cool. So like basically, the flood eat everything that's living, right? So the Prometheans were a way to convert living people into robots, basically, right? You digitize them, and then they can fight the flood, and they now are immune to that, right? They're immune to, they can't be taken over.
They just didn't remain as who they were, so
they don't remain, and they can't return to biological form. That was the whole point. The point was to be able to survive the onslaught of the flood, and then return to a clone of their body, a clone of their tissue into their original bodies, and every time they tried, it failed. And so, per Jesse, there's another terminal cutscene where you see like the monstrosity that occurs when they try to do that. So yeah,
So
Prometheans was awesome.
So initially, like that whole journey, like, so, okay, like I get digitized and I'm now a Promethean. And eventually it was supposed to go back to being a human.
Yeah, outlast the flood. They have no more food. We're all digital. Once they die out, we can then go back to clone versions. Yeah.
But it didn't work, right? So like,
so
once you're digital, always digital.
And your mind becomes corrupted. Like it just doesn't, you know, it's that question of like, if you could transplant your brain into another body, are you still you? And so like they couldn't reconcile their identity, you know, after being digitized.
I think that part was explained in like the big exposition dump when you get your upgrade. With the librarian in Halo 4, because she talks about how she talks about how their essence gets digitized, but they were never able to bring it back to the original forms. They got corrupted or something.
So now that's all, you know, very interesting. I guess so that helps kind of understand. So like so when we saw all those people get disintegrated, they were becoming Prometheans at that point, right? Is that kind of
like he was pulling their essence in, and then he could create Prometheans off
more
of that.
soldiers.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I had no idea what was happening there. I just thought they were, you know, melting.
Yeah. So he just wanted to kill all of humanity and then turn them into his pets, pretty much.
Yeah, 2 birds with 1 stone type of scenario.
Yep. Because the reason why in Halo 4 the Didact was so angry was because he had actually been on Zeta Halo at one point for a while, stuck with the he was stuck with the Primordial, right? Yeah, and the Primordial drove him. Yeah,
he interrogated the Primordial.
Yeah, he went. Yeah, but it drove him insane, and not Primordial really got to him, and he was broken at that point.
Yeah, because then he thought the only solution was to digitize and exterminate anything that wasn't for Forerunner.
So let's talk about the Didact, because you just mentioned him. So all
Which
this
one? There were 2 Didacts. Do you know that?
Oh no!
Yeah.
See, I had no freaking clue until that.
See, there was the Didact, who's the one we know from Halo 4, and there was the Didact, who was a cloned version of him, essentially, where the librarian took a regular Forerunner who was just gonna, have a regular life, and she eventually the Didact himself injected mutated him, this guy, into a clone of him in case he had died, because they needed more Didacts to fight the humanity and the flood and everything. So, but eventually the librarian sided with the Didact against the Didact, and they eventually died together after the Halo rings were fired, and they had done their jobs.
So who wants to give us the history of the Didact, like the main guy from Halo 4? I think that's a good thing to try to understand, especially how it ties to all this stuff. So you want to do that one?
You want to go,
Daniel?
Sure. I mean the short version is you could view him as the military and ultimately the military head, as well as the governing body of the Forerunner. They kind of worked, right?
Forerunners were first
correct.
It was Primordial or
Precursors. Yeah.
Precursors. Then it was
exactly.
Forerunners. Okay.
So he ruled. There was a council, but he also ruled kind of in tandem with the librarian, who was his wife. Like kind of what Jesse wrapped up. He was the one who originally thought that humanity's escape from the flood was an act of aggression. So he was the one who first called to start eradicating humanity.
Humanity really did kill a lot of Forerunners in the process, like a lot of women and children and stuff. So he was rightfully angry.
Didn't they? Weren't they originally trying to clear the flood infestations on Forerunner?
Yeah,
planets?
they would just kill entire planets.
Okay.
Yeah. They were trying to eliminate the food, essentially, that the flood would have. Exactly. After the interrogation with the Primordial, that anger and that hostility, that kind of like aggressive nature he already had, accelerated to genocidal tendencies. At that point, that's when the Promethean program started. That's when he and the librarian started fracturing, and she's actually the reason he's imprisoned. When in Halo 4, when we reawaken him, he's just essentially trying to reinitiate that program of eradicating life. I can't remember, Jesse, if he's even aware that the flood isn't quote unquote active at the time, but
he's focused on humanity that we never got to see that much.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
he's
I thought.
Just I really hate people.
Yeah, he's just a genocidal maniac.
How much of that hatred was due to the Precursor telling him that it was actually supposed to be
humanities that have the mantle? Yeah.
Like, wasn't a lot of that driven by that?
I mean, it was like he already had the spark, and then that just lit the flame on fire, right? I mean, he already was xenophobic towards humanity, even when they weren't aggressive, or what he saw as aggressive. But yeah, that conversation basically, like Jesse said, it kind of broke him. It took an already present form of hatred and just turned it to 11. We see him try to basically reinitiate the program of complete humanity wipeout via the composer, which you do see that active, I think, on the second or third last level, and then again we see it hit Phoenix. New Phoenix is the city that rises from there, and it wipes out millions of people, Jesse, if I remember right. And then, obviously we quote unquote kill him at the end of 4, but he doesn't actually die there. If I remember right, Jesse, wasn't he killed in a
comic book? Yeah, a poorly drawn comic book.
Right. Yeah, and even
that
then,
was during the dark days of Xbox, where they didn't have much budget.
The Matrix days.
They solve a whole story in a.
Well, even like Halo Wars 2 had a prequel comic book series that had a couple beautifully drawn ones, and then there's like no more money for it. Yeah, it's going to be mostly like stick figures.
So you mentioned, we mentioned a few different things here. So first of all, like real quick, Mantle, explain that, because that's the thing that makes the Didact jealous, right? That humans.
Yeah, it's pretty much whoever is considered the strongest. Yeah, they're the shepherds of life in the galaxy.
Okay. Yeah. So we're considered, humans were given the mantle, we're able to be shepherds.
Well, they wanted to give us the mantle. Forerunner said, "Heck no, we're taking it," and then they killed the Precursors.
Okay. Right. So that caused a lot of problems.
That caused all the problems.
Basically, everything is the Didact's fault. Is how you can look at it.
Yeah, like everything's the Forerunner's fault.
Or Didact, excuse me. Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because it is interesting. We don't ever see the Didact until Halo 4, but it does seem like he's kind of like the key to almost everything, right? Like in that we know of in the story, and then then the rings were built to basically get rid of the Flood's food, I guess. Well, I mean, that's what most people know, right? Like from the book, the games, they do tell you that, and those were built by the Forerunners, right? So the Didact was kind of in charge of that. Does that sound right? Or
no? So there were multiple classes. Okay. Yeah, the builders were the ones in charge of that. Right. He was like the military muscle. The librarian was, the life. The hell was her name again?
Xenoarchaeologist.
It was a Forerunner named Faber.
Yep. Yeah, Faber was the master builder. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, cut you off.
Okay.
I was gonna make a master joke, but then I couldn't think of one that wouldn't be too dirty.
So okay, if he's the master builder, who gave him the orders to do the master building?
That was kind of like they kind of had,
wasn't it?
Yeah, and they kind of already had these like class.
Well, this was after eons and like a lot of fighting with the Flood. This was like what the council and the last remaining Forerunners thought was like the last resort. If everything else that they keep trying doesn't work, we're gonna make these rings and just destroy all life.
Yeah, and then they had their shield worlds, which were where they were between the rings and the shield worlds where they would try to keep stuff
The
so they
Dyson
could
spheres.
reseed. Yeah. Reseed the universe.
Yep.
Okay, that's a good explanation.
Which
All right,
Requiem or that was a Dyson sphere. That was a sphere world that Jesse was just talking about.
So I've been asking a lot of questions, and obviously we brought Amanda too. That she read the most recent book, but didn't read some of the previous ones. Amanda, did I ask all the questions, or is there some things that you're curious about too in regards to some of the things we just talked about?
I just have been absorbing, to be honest. I don't really. Yeah, I don't. I'd have to think. It's a lot.
Yeah, they're definitely.
It's like even just the basic overview is kind of a lot.
Like if we were given a test right now, do you think we would remember everything?
Can I be spoilerish with Halo Wars 2 a bit?
Yeah, I think we're going to allow spoilers for Halo Wars. So by the way, if you go any further, everything that's been in any game. In fact, I would even say anything that's been in a book, anything that's been out there prior to Infinite the game is fair game. So if you don't want any spoilers, if people don't want any spoilers for anything, that's where, because you're reading it or you're playing through Halo Wars 2, now is the time.
We'll probably title this Spoiler Cast.
Yeah. Step away from the show now and come back once you're done. But this is really intended for us to get caught up and recap it, but also for those of us that don't know all this extra stuff, kind of who probably won't get a chance to read the books before the games come out, to really kind of have that color to that world. So we are going to start
hitting more of like the actual setup for Infinite 2.
Yeah,
I think that'll be better to be more specific on.
Yeah, and so we're gonna get into a lot of the stuff about the Banished and Zeta Halo in a little bit, but we do want to recap some of the basics. We say they're basics, but they're really like I said,
it's 20 years of basics in some points, and then
Yeah.
a solid decade-ish of basics. So it's a lot.
What about the House of Pain? Talk about that, because that's something that's brought up.
Palace of Pain.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm thinking about jumping around. Man, why did I say House of Pain? It's whatever. Palace of Pain. That's what I meant.
I can go on this if you guys want. So the Palace of Pain isn't actually one location, but multiple labs, I guess, or test chambers that are spread around. Yeah, well, they eventually turn
torture
into
zones,
torture chambers, because Faber, the master builder, the original intent was, and he kind of formed an agreement with the librarian on allowing him to do testing to find a cure for the flood from the humans that were on Zeta Halo, because like Jesse mentioned earlier, the flood weren't really infecting humans, and they thought that testing and running these tests and experiments on humans would lead to a cure, or why they're not getting infected, when really, like Jesse said earlier, they weren't focused on the humans at all. They were focused entirely on...
it was just a choice,
their
not
intent was... they
were focused on the Forerunner because they were seeking revenge on the Forerunner. And so originally it was meant for that, but then after Medican bias and also Faber came under like the influence of the Precursor, Primordial, thanks. They basically just kept experimenting for pleasure, like the torture, like they got entertainment and amusement from the torture, and the humans knew that if you went to these locations, that you would either not come back or you would come back and like not right, and so they nicknamed these locations the Palace of Pain, and I'm hoping we see or get some hints and stuff in Infinite regarding that, because that is major. That is a big part of the lore surrounding or behind Zeta.
As is Mendican bias, right? So he's a big part of that. Okay, so maybe now is a good time. Well, should we step back? Is there some key, like, let's touch real quickly on 4 and 5 and try to clear up anything that's major that maybe we should take away going into Infinite, and then we'll go to the Zeta Halo, and I think the Zeta Halo is where we'll cover Mendicant Violence and some of that other stuff. So for 4 and 5, what are like? How would you, and maybe I'll turn this over to you, Daniel. Like, kind of maybe help summarize like what really happened in 4. I mean, we know about the Cortana and Master Chief. I think people who played the game, that's the thing that really sunk in for them. That's what sunk in for me. I could understand that aspect the first time I played it. But in terms of everything else, I know we kind of covered a lot of things indirectly, like the Didact and all that. But in terms of what happened there, like what else have we not covered that we would want to know about that?
4 I think we covered pretty well, and 5 is super simple in the sense that because what was there was more than a little bit of a mess, but ultimately leading into Infinite, the takeaways from 5 were that Cortana, or the version of Cortana that we see in 5, that basically wants to take the mantle of responsibility for herself and for her AI compatriots, essentially starts that process. So because of her injection into the domain, she essentially is able to take control of what Forerunner facilities and AI and weapons there are, so that she can essentially start a police state across the galaxy. And if you step out of line, then she'll basically decimate the planet that steps out of line. But as we see in the beginning of Infinite, at least from what we've seen thus far, that seems to have fallen apart, either basically in a combination of events from Halo Wars 2 with Atriox and their discovery of the Proto-Grave Mind, and the technologies that they discover on the Ark, and including the Flood, and then obviously what we know of the Nutana's deletion of old Cortana. So I think that's the biggest takeaways from 5 is her initiation of that global AI-led revolution, and a seeming failure to do so at the beginning of Infinite. Jesse, do you want to add anything?
In one of the things they've shown that is less spoilery, some of the previews had some really surprising spoilers allowed into them.
Yeah.
I've tried to avoid as many as I could.
But I will say this, Mike, they are surprising they're in there, but I also don't think like the big one is by any means set in stone. Not even close. It's more of an assumption, because that person hasn't been around for 6 months. So, but also there's a dead Guardian on Zeta Halo. Like, it's just completely dead and turned off in the background. It's been 18 months between Halo 5 and Halo Infinite. A lot of shit can happen in those 18 months. Like the Banished. So the way Halo Wars 2 started, the Ark from Halo 3, your ship from Halo Wars, which they gave up their ability to jump through space, their subspace engine, to defeat the Covenant. God, was it like 30 years before Halo?
Yes, I think so.
Time?
Yeah, it was like 30
and they all
the
go
Spirit
into
of Fire.
cryo sleep. Yeah. Spirit of Fire. They all go into cryo sleep. They're just drifting into space, and thanks to plot magic, they end up at the Ark. Just happen through a portal, go to the Ark. But the Banished are on the Ark, and they've taken over the portal essentially that the UNSC had set up to try and just sort of archaeologically dig around, or how you would call it, explore the Ark, get technology,
Excavate.
figure shit out. Yeah. But of course, you don't want to excavate too much. They put a giant energy field working alongside the Sangheili around the Covenant City ship that had crashed there with all the Flood on it, which becomes important later.
High Charity,
Halo Wars,
right?
Yeah, High Charity.
Yeah.
The big thing with Halo Wars 2 is you've got the really old UNSC ship with actual Spartan 2s and Red Team fighting this brand new, ridiculously cool enemy that they created, which are called the Banished. Which I know IGN said like they were part of the Covenant, but they were people who worked in the Covenant, but then were treated horribly and tortured and prison, and their friends were killed, and so they revolted killed their captors, and then their entire thing was to be a mercenary group that took everyone from everywhere, including humans. There's plenty of humans in the Banished.
That's interesting.
They're really good at taking other people's tech and then making it their own, which you've actually seen a bit in the previews. They use human weaponry a lot. They're really good at stripping things down, and they want to take over all the Forerunner tech, and they're getting really good at it. The big bad, his name is Atriox. He is pretty much a giant monkey Spartan. He's got a ton of cybernetic enhancements. He's way stronger than a Spartan too. He beats the ever-loving crap out of Red Team single-handedly. He's enormous, really cybernetically enhanced, really ruthless and smart, but also not stupid. Like, he doesn't. The thing about the Covenant
He's extremely
was they
strategic.
were. Yep. Then the Covenant's strategy was, how do we kill all life in the galaxy by turning the Halo rings on so we can go on our, religious journey. Whereas he is just, I want vengeance on the shitheads who tortured me and killed my people. I also want to make a bunch of money and get power.
Power.
That's what I was going to say, is like the Banished have far more parallels to the Precursors, at least the Precursors revenge aspect, than they do to the Covenant. And one of the things that a lot of the previews kind of gloss over is that the Covenant was, so that the Banished, like you said, Jesse, have species that were never in the Covenant, because the Covenant was essentially just a term. I mean, it was a term for a religious, social grouping, right? Like, it wasn't one species, obviously, as we know.
And it was
just
very hierarchical.
Yeah, it was very, very classist. Sorry, Cat. Very classist. But there were tons of species in the galaxy that were never part of the Covenant, and that's the difference. Or that may have been part of the Covenant, but never, that were essentially slaves within the Covenant. And that's the difference with the Banished, was that they were far more, like you said, Jesse, invested in revenge and gaining strongholds of power, and they didn't care who wanted to be part of their group.
As long as you were strong, you could join.
As long as you were strong, as long as you were willing to work and fight, that's all their standard was. So I kind of hope that they dive into some of those elements in Infinite, like we saw in Halo Wars 2 in the books.
So talk a little bit more about their motivations, because you were just talking about how Atriox he's out for vengeance, right? His people were tortured. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like, what maybe give a little bit more detail on how the Banished came to be.
Well, I mean, they Atriox specifically wasn't a believer. He was considered a heretic, right, Jesse? Like, he was because, again, like I said, the Covenant is just as much a religion as it is a
military.
Well, it wasn't.
So he was from the Covenant.
Yeah, but before, it wasn't until...
Well, he didn't join the Covenant, if I remember right. Like, he specifically stood against...
No, he was part of the Covenant originally, but it was from the early days when... So the Brutes were considered like second-class citizens. They were...
Right.
And it wasn't until the Prophet of Regret, was it?
Right.
That died... What now?
Oh, yes.
It wasn't until the Prophet of Regret that died that they finally swapped out the Sangheli for the Brutes. But before then, the Brutes were just cannon fodder, and Atriox was sent out in these groups of 40, I believe, and for whatever reason, these groups of 40 were just meant to die. They were meant to be sent on suicide missions just to do these kind of suicide missions for the...
It was kind of like the Russian World War II strategy. It just overwhelmed with numbers.
I guess what I was trying to say is that the difference is that with the heretic elite that we see in Halo 2, like, who initially was a believer, like, that was the difference. Atriox was never a follower of the faith. He was just a component of his society more than anything else. And but
and he grew more and more bitter towards the Covenant every time he would come back alive and seeing his brothers dying. And then but he did a lot to, like, invigorate and rally the brutes, and he basically became a position of power or inspiration within the brute, I guess, wing of the Covenant, and it really made the prophets nervous. So they sent him to die, basically this as an example, calling him a heretic. And I think they set him up to really brand him as a heretic. Yeah, they set him up as some kind of mission or something, if I remember correctly. And then whenever he was sent to,
he's too good.
He was sent to a location to be executed. He basically defied the execution, and then the surrounding brutes that were there, they also sided with Atriox, and that was kind of the start. And like Jesse said earlier, they were kind of like mercenaries in the beginning, but really strategic, and where they were just growing power and allies, and they would hire on other mercenary branches or groups, and then and they also took in everyone. So they would basically do these strategic, covert, or guerrilla warfare type of attacks and recruit who was willing to join them and kill the rest, all for the sake of power, like power and revenge. Right now, it just seems like power, because it's pretty widely known that the Covenant are.
Yeah, they did die in 5.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and what's left seems to have joined them, because there's so many people in Covenant gear in Infinite already.
Well,
there assumes there
was another splinter group.
Yeah, the Zealots that followed that tried to in Halo 4 that tried to revive the Forerunners and Didact. Yeah.
Well, so basically, the religious group is gone now, right? Like the Covenant as we knew them is defeated.
In the one book, there was another, the more recent one, the Return of the Shadows of Reach. There was that, because they joined with the Banished. They were also
there's
like
the Keepers of One Freedom. There's there's a lot of splinter groups. That's like the crazy monkey group that wants to kill everyone. They want to do the great journey. They still believe that activating the rings like bring you to a higher plane of consciousness and all that stuff. Could I spoil the newest book?
Absolutely. No, let's spoil. So, this is gonna be spoilers.
I'm wondering where expansions are gonna go with this, because the next book is actually the prior 6 months between Master Chief getting left in space and being revived. It's 6 months on the ring with a team of Spartans. So, but the newest book that just came out, called Divine Wind, is about the leader of the Keepers of One Freedom, Caster, and a group of Spartans and all that.
Which was in the Shadows of Reach.
Yeah.
So, and Mike, if you wanna mute me for a minute, I'll just give a real quick what happens with him.
Go for it. Okay. I'm interested in what happens to Caster, but I don't want to spoil it.
So real quickly, I'll just say he learns that the Great Journey is bullshit and it's just killing everyone, and he loses his faith. So I'm just wondering
it's the
where they're going to go now. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, but he's still also pretty pissed and stuff. But yeah, I'll give Mike a thumbs up. Okay. So I'm wondering, because with these story expansions, I do wonder, do you do every couple of years you do a huge chief expansion, but then you can have smaller story things that go along with
different characters?
Maybe that's what I'm hoping to do.
That's what I'm excited about. Yeah.
Because we know from the end of Shadows of Reach, we know Divine Wind takes place on the Ark, which is where the Spirit of Fire and the Banished and everything are. So, will they get into that? Because Atriox is obviously back. We know that from the book, and we see his hologram in one of the very first level in the previews. You see him, and Escherum's like his mentor. So, I'm really hoping they pull in a lot of that stuff, because it's very well written.
Yeah. Before I have to run, I was going to say that you look at it, Bungie and 343. They've both had Halo 2 ODST. 5 obviously had instances where you're playing characters other than the chief, and they've always gotten some elements right, but it's never felt quite right. And I feel like because Infinite is seen as a platform, because Infinite has so much, because Zeta, Halo, and everything leading to Infinite has so much lore that ties in from 4, 5, Halo Wars 2. It's like, this seems like it would be the perfect opportunity to place as Locke in a random expansion, or Caster,
or Whiff. Because I was thinking the Whiff thing. Because have you played the Academy yet? the tutorial.
Yeah.
That actually
was
contextualizes
fantastic.
where you are in the universe. You're an actual thing.
Right.
I really wouldn't be surprised if your multiplayer
If you take your Spartan,
and they're the one that goes and interacts with these side stories because you
Yeah,
build it
see,
up
that
to
would
get
be
your
cool.
gear. Yeah, that would be neat.
That would be
that would be
pretty
cool.
neat. Yeah, this. I mean, we've been talking about some of the stuff, and the universe is so expansive that there'd be a lot of neat ways you can go explore some of that backstory, right? Like in very focused campaigns. But that's probably something we'll talk about on.
Was
on
it
some
your
future
time
shows.
to go? Sadly, Dan.
It is. Yeah, I gotta go jump on a work call. Sorry, guys.
Oh, all right, man.
All right.
Well,
I'm very
Alright.
sorry for you having to go to work call.
Yeah.
Love you.
Sunday night.
we'll talk to you soon, Daniel. Thanks for thanks for
Later,
all
man.
the
Salary, man. See you guys.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Hey, it works.
We're
I'm happy.
one lore master down.
Yeah, I might get you covered.
I'm just trying to keep up. Like I thought I knew, I thought I had a grasp, but
So
it gets way more involved than I thought.
Mm.
And I
Is
was
it-
confused about who the brutes were exactly. So I just did a quick Wikipedia, and it said that the brutes were meant to serve as the barbarians of Rome, which I think that makes a little bit more sense. Like the barbarians in Rome, like they were used in the military, but they were also the ones that destroyed everything. So they were used, but also they destroyed. So
let's
that
talk
makes
a
more
little bit.
sense.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. Now, you mentioned that the Atriox is more basically just kind of out for vengeance. Now, when they recruit, though, the Banished, are these just a bunch of, like, what is the motivation of the rest of the people that he's bringing on? Do they ever get into any
It
of that?
really varies. Yeah, they do.
Okay. So maybe you could expound
wanna
on
go,
some
Mike?
of that.
No, you can go. You can go ahead because it does vary. I was gonna say I thought he was talking about the Banished and Atriox in general, where is now it just seems like domination and power seems to be the primary motivation behind his actions or his direction.
Yeah, sort of. He got what he wanted with the Covenant being defeated.
Yeah.
So now, like, where do you go from that? It's like, okay, they're gone. Now I essentially can just sort of take this ridiculously strong group I've made that's gotten a ton of Forerunner tech, and we've reverse engineered it in ways. And their main thing was they were always growing in the background.
Yeah.
And as the Covenant fell apart, as various factions fell apart, as humanity started more civil warring again, as the Covenant fight was done, they recruit and they offer decent pay. If you're loyal and you're useful, they treat you fine. Like it's a big difference from the Covenant, whereas the Covenant conscripts you and yeah.
Yeah, real quick, I was just going to add that one of the things with Atriox that he wanted to make sure is that he gets enough. Like one of the primary reasons for seeking power is so that people didn't experience what he did, or his troops didn't experience what he did. Like he did not want to be like the Covenant in that sense of being able to have the power to protect, or I guess not have his troops experience the cannon fodder, I guess, even though you still have that with like the grunts and stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to completely avoid.
Yeah.
So basically, he pays them well. So basically, a lot of the Banished
Decent pay and decent treatment.
Okay, they're like bandwagon fans.
And it's also it's people who have a reason to want to fight the peoples that the Banished fight a lot of the times.
Okay.
For a giant like space monkey, he's pretty charismatic too. Like he's very cunning. He's very, very in I forget if it was Daniel or very strategic.
It was a Dan, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did.
He's like
I'll
the
link it.
Alexander the Great of Halo. Sorry, I have to tie it all into history because it really, it makes sense because it's really just, the arc of the history of the world just in space.
Yeah, they're using those references for people to get, and the cutscenes in Halo Wars 2 through the expansion, the base campaign and the expansion are some of the best in any video game ever, made by Blur, obviously. So they still look unbelievable to this day. They're well written, which is one of the main things that I was hoping for with Halo Infinite, in which John has said yes, everything I've seen in these first 4 levels and open exploration area I can talk about, extremely well written. And even the books have been, like, I wasn't a huge fan of Shadows of Reach because there was just so much military jargon porn in his writing, like really focusing on how a battle works, and eventually it just got a little much. But in Divine Wind, same author, fantastic storytelling, like really good. He still gets into the tactics a lot, but when he wasn't, he was definitely held into, I have to get blue team here to do this, I've got to get the Banished here to do this, to set up Halo Infinite. It was a very, I'm restricted by my prequel writing, so I've got to make characters and kill them off, because the main thing is just Chief and Blue Team are going to get these copies of Halsey's brain from Castle Base, which has been blown up, but the monkeys have been excavating it in the Banished because they want to get on the portal that's there. That was actually referenced back in the past to get to the Ark, because the Atriox has been stuck on the Ark for a very long time.
So let's to expound on that a little bit. Getting copies of Cortana's brain or whatever. So that's part of the Halo Wars too, right?
No. That's part of the Shadows of Reach book.
Okay.
And they never directly say that. It's just strongly insinuated throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, cryogenically sealed. Yeah.
You know. Is
that why we assume that's how we assume Nutana was built?
Another clone of Halsey's brain, but much more restricted to keep her in. Like, the moment you finish your job, you delete yourself, which of course she didn't do for some reason. She doesn't know why. She wanted to. She's very naive because she's new, and she's also very controlled in what she's allowed to do because they don't want another Cortana.
Right.
It would be our guess.
Yeah.
Seems obvious.
Real quick to touch back on what Jesse was mentioning earlier just a second ago with Halo Wars 2. Anyone that's interested about the Banished or Atriox, watch the opening cutscene. Go to YouTube, watch the opening cutscene of Halo Wars 2, and it's well done, made by Blur, does a pretty good job summarizing the Banished and Atriox, and it also has a kick-ass scene of him beating down 3 Spartan 2s.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not, I don't think they're Mark V Marliner because they don't have the shield yet, but they're still
they were their old ones.
Yeah, pre-shield, but still they're mounting their armor that is supposed to enhance them a lot.
They're super strong, they're super fast, and he just beats the shit out of them and crushes their arm, crushes one guy's arm, just picks up and crushes a helmet. He's stupidly strong.
He is.
But there is also another part to the Banished, because he is strong, they are strong. But at the time of Halo Wars 2, they're also really overselling themselves. Like, it's in the audio logs, they're called Phoenix logs in the game. They're actually not nearly as big as they say. They haven't done nearly as much as they say, but they're very into propaganda, which has also turned out to be a thing in Halo Infinite. There's a lot of propaganda towers, which is, like Division 2-ish, which is funny, but it really makes sense for them. Because it's been a very slow build for them.
Yeah, and at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about propaganda towers, but then it makes sense because if there's Marines that are willing to go to their side, that would be like, or even just a tactic to have them come out of hiding to capture them or kill them. It does make sense for something that
they're very strategic, as Dan said. They're not above whatever it takes to get what they want. They do guerrilla tactics, they do hit and run, they've built up their army by stealing from Covenant bases that they knew about, and they're a really good antagonist. I think they're a very different one. I know people just keep saying, the Banished or the Covenant again, but it's like, story-wise, they're really not. Yes, combat-wise, but even then, this is by far the most fun-looking fighting the brutes they've ever had.
You can like boil it down to a Covenant 2.0, but it has such a nice spin to it, and it's a lot better than what we saw in Halo 4 and 5. It's
the reason, like, their focus on strength and power, and then their big thing being power armor, and that's the stuff you see flying off of people when you shoot them, and like you see their helmets pop off, and like the bigger, really tough ones that then they do their little stomp and they turn their shield on. Like, there's a method to everything that the Banished do that's really fun to actually finally see in a first-person game, because it was awesome in Halo Wars 2, the blister backs and all their various takes on Covenant machines, like breaking them down and rebuilding. And in that keep that everyone was able to play in the preview, you see them stripping down Scorpions because they're going to repurpose them for different things and make new weapons or excavation machines out of them and stuff. They're really they're like brilliant basic tear down rebuild engineers. They're not great at making things entirely, but they're awesome at repurposing things.
Do we get anything from their point of view?
Yeah, the Halo Wars 2 DLC is, and you play as the Banished, which is nice. And it's a pair of brothers who, one of them is really smart and tactical. The other one's very smart with repurposing Forerunner tech. So for those reasons, they're seen as very high up. They lead their clan because it's all clan based with the brutes. And their clan, the younger brother wants to go to High Charity, which to get tech and stuff. Even though Atriox is like, don't go anywhere near it. You friggin' idiots, or I'll kill you. And of course, the DLC is called Awakening the Nightmare. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah. There's also a lot of sides shown or presented in the Shadows of Reach, and plus the book that Jesse read.
Yeah, there's more. There's even more in Divine Wind.
Yeah, because it's about the two brothers, right? They're
a big part of it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, and even in some of the cutscenes that I didn't watch, but I saw, but I didn't hear, that I saw in some of the previews, it looks like they do cut away at some points from the single shot with Master Chief to show.
Yeah, a lot of those were actually people. It was a lot of people were skipping them, like John skipped most, Jeff Grubb skipped Gersman, but they'll generally pull out from Chief and then swoop wherever they need to, and then slowly swoop back to him. So they will give you things from outside of his direct perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting.
Avian and Vortis are their names, by the way.
Are they still alive?
They're in Divine Wind, so I'll just not go more than that.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so the DLC for Halo Wars 2 is essentially they go into High Charity and release the friggin' Flood because Vortis is an idiot who just wants to get all that tech back, and Atriox is like, no, don't go anywhere near that ship. He goes in, Flood get out, and the way the Flood work is over time they're building. Using all the biomass, essentially, that was still in High Charity, and then start using all the Banished and UNSC biomass that's around the ring to build grave mines. I think by the end of it, they built like freaking 6 because they've been there so long.
The proto grave mines, yeah.
Yep. So, like, the things that would eventually, one of them would become the leader of the Flood again. Like, the consciousness that we saw in 2 and 3 and killed in 3. But,
wait, repeat that again. You said what were they trying to do with the Flood?
So what they're trying to do is just get into High Charity and get tech for the Banished, like because it was the Covenant capital city. There's a ton of really valuable technology in there. And they don't know that the Flood are in there. Like, I think they don't believe. Vortis doesn't believe it. Padman doesn't want to go. Yeah.
But it's the Flood like a myth, or they just have no idea what's there?
They think the stories are overblown. One brother warns the other brother, because I just played this maybe a month ago. The one brother warns the other brother, like, about the stories. He's like, I don't believe them to be true, and yada yada. And,
how good is that freaking game, Mike?
Yeah, it's so good. It's so very good.
So underappreciated, man.
Halo Wars 2?
Halo Wars 2 main campaign, very good. Halo Wars 2's expansion, even better. And you can play that entire thing co-op.
Yeah, I told Abe, let me know whenever he plays.
Yeah, I have to jump on and do that because I lost my RTS skills. But
it's a real-time strategy game, Amanda. The over-the-top view, but it's real-time. So you click on people to control them. You just tell them to go do something, and then they do it. It's not a first-person. It's a strategy game, but it's actually
my favorite.
It works well on a controller.
The only game that I will put up with that is The Sims. So if Halo Sims.
No, it's a little bit more actiony than that. If you
want Halo Sims, you're gonna have to wait for Infinite's Forge mode. That'll be pretty much The Sims. If you had to program every character in The Sims directly.
So the Banished do sound pretty interesting as a baddie, because they're not as well. Number one, they're not fully I guess they're established, but they sound like they're more up and coming, right? Like they're still kind of on their way up, doing a little bit of.
Were until the time jump, they were that, but
Okay.
they really seem to have coming now.
Even in the past, when they were up and coming, they were still more of a threat to the Covenant than we were.
Mhm.
So like no matter what, throughout the Covenant human war, the Banished.
Oh wow.
They
were existing in the background that whole time then.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. They had already been.
Yeah, they didn't mess with anything
except.
Yep, they were pissed at the Covenant. They were constantly attacking them. They weren't going after humanity really. They were using humans in their ranks. Like they were hitting and running every Covenant facility they knew of that they could, while the Covenant was also fighting us. So, but they weren't really an issue with humanity until Halo Wars 2 and the Ark and all that started. Around that time, they had begun. Okay, Covenant's gone. We gotta really avoid Cortana, but in the meantime, we're gonna start hitting and running and trying to take over everywhere.
Do we know why? Do we know why the brutes don't like humanity? I mean, you seem like they.
It's not so much a direct "we don't like
or...
humans" thing. Yeah, it's just more of a you're there working with the Sangheili, who we hate, because humans and the elites, the big predator mouth guys, get along really well for the most part.
Yeah, it would seem like humanity wouldn't really want to side with the brutes. I mean, ethically.
No, yeah. The way from Atriox, for him, it's kind of you're either with us or against us. And so if you're with us, he's willing to take you in. But if you're not with us, then you're automatically against us. And
no questions.
Yeah. And kind of like what Jesse said, with us siding with the Sangheili or the elites, they do not get along.
Yeah, they were never going to get along with the Arbiter. So the fact that we are always going to get along with the Arbiter means we were never going to get along with them.
Yeah.
So those are your factions. So does that kind of nutshell the story then for Halo Wars 2 with the DLC? Okay.
Yes. I can give you a broad overview. Halo Wars 2, it's UNSC happens upon the ring, wakes up, the Ark wakes up, go down to start finding things. You'll see they run into the Banished, and then it's a back and forth between them and the Banished, and then the ending plays into Halo 5 Guardians because it came out a little after.
Right after, yeah.
Yeah, but time-wise, it was sort of set really close, like almost the exact same time, I think.
Right.
The end of Halo Wars 2 is pretty much the middle of Halo 5, and or like the endish part, because once the Guardians are coming up, like all that stuff, and then going from Halo Wars 2 into Halo Infinite, because you're sort of jumping timeline. It was Halo 4, Halo 5, Halo Wars 2, Halo Infinite. It's a full 18 months in universe time skip. So like what's been going on with Cortana in the Created. We know the basic that she had set up base on Zeta Halo. We don't know why. We don't know what's happened to her outside of what the weapon said, where Cortana has been deleted. Is she really? If so, by whom? We don't know that, and that's going to be one of the main crux of the story of Infinite. Much like Halo 4 was you're fighting the Didact, but it's really about Cortana. Halo Infinite's going to be you're fighting the Banished, you're fighting whatever the Harbinger is, or learning about whatever the Harbinger is after they've come out of that Silex, tomb, essentially, while trying to find Cortana, or at least what happened to her.
So that's the mystery right now, right? So that's the thing that whether you're a book reader or not, Chief
and Cortana,
right? Because the last time we saw Cortana was then to Halo 5, right? So she doesn't come up in the books at all.
She's her presence,
she's referenced.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't want to wake up.
We don't want her and her guardians to come around.
Yeah.
So she's still alive. She's still a factor, like in the universe. You know that, but
as far as the lore or the story goes, you just assume that she's a threat until the weapon tells you that she's been.
She's
deleted.
Running the galaxy essentially during these books.
Okay.
And Shadows of Reach, they won't use nukes. They won't use anything that would rouse her awareness of them. And the Infinity is still doing its thing of constantly jumping whenever they think she's near. She hasn't been able to find them. In Halo Infinite is seemingly essentially starting with also you don't know what happened to the Infinity. So that's another mystery that's part of it.
Let's talk about Shadows of Reach for a minute, because that's something you guys did the book podcast on, right? So like, what's the general theme of that? And Amanda, if you want to jump in on this one too, that I know that's one you read, right? That's
nope. We actually did the original Fall of Reach book.
Oh,
yeah, the very first one. Yeah, the one that started it all.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's just really quickly, Jesse, recap the Shadows of Reach then. So like, did anything really happen there that people might want to know for Infinite?
It's a direct prequel, essentially, in the sense of where does the weapon come from.
Okay.
We think. They never say it directly. It's Chief and Blue Team go back to Reach. They're trying to go to Castle Base to get a MacGuffin. You don't know what it is. They never directly state it, other than it's 3 cases that are cryogenically frozen, or they get them. But also the Banished are there as well, because they want to activate a portal that'll connect to the Ark. And at the end of that book, Atriox comes through the portal. So he's finally back in the greater universe.
Yeah, the main thing that said or referenced is that this mission's so important that what they're going to collect is like the key to winning the war or fighting back against Cortana. And that's all they really...
And them calling her the weapon, it really just,
implies that. Yeah.
So when everybody saw Nutana, that's what they implied. That's
what a lot of us thought. The moment we read the book, we thought that they were getting copies of Cortana.
Okay, so that all makes sense, and I think that helps kind of paint that picture. So we talked a lot about the Banished. I think that there's a lot of interesting backstory to go with them. It'd be more interesting to kind of learn more about how that progresses, and right now it just seems like they're just on a mission to just control everything, right? Just get more power.
That's what they had been building up, and so it's like, well, what are you going to keep doing? You're a giant military force now. You had been a mercenary group, and now what do you do?
Right.
Well, you keep going. That's all you know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I've had in my. I couldn't think of a good time to ask. Like, what do they think they're going to do after a certain point? They're going to be the ones everybody's coming after. It's like, it's inevitable.
Yeah, it's not like they were going to have a ton of peace treaties.
They just want to control everything. And I guess they think by their masses that people will just come to them because they don't have any other choice, which will in turn make them even stronger. But also, what's your end goal? I mean, at a certain point, everything's going to collapse anyway. But I mean, he's a narcissist, so I guess he feels he's going to keep everything going forever. So.
I also do want to point out that Eshram, the main baddie in Infinite, is also in Shadows of Reach. So like, you do get some.
Oh, let's talk about him. Let's talk about him. So we talked a lot about the Banished, but obviously Eshram, he's basically like your Darth Maul of Infinite, basically. He's kind of like what is he like second in command to Atriox or what?
He was his mentor, right, Mike? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think he was originally his mentor, but then during Shadows of Reach, he's like the voice of Atriox. Like Atriox communicates to him while Atriox is stuck on Ark, and then
Atriox is like the big guy, and he's his middle manager.
Yeah,
gotcha.
And so like he basically controls Eshram, and Eshram, through direction of Atriox, commands the rest of the Banished.
So is there anything that we ever learned in the books about Eshram, like his motivation or his backstory or anything? Or is he just kind of like just...
You need to look it up.
Okay, so is he just kind of just like, hey, he's just a badass lieutenant?
That's super smart, super tactical, really likes, really believes in Atriox and what he's doing.
Okay.
And he's basically... Atriox Senior without the modifications, if I remember correctly. Like he's got a lot of the same characteristics. He's strategic. He's really he's a seasoned warrior. Like that's why he's grown bored. That's what like he said in his speech in last year's demo, and plus clips this year. Like he's grown bored because he's beaten everyone. So he sees.
He also really hates humanity. That's one of his things.
Yeah.
So he just wants a one-on-one sport with SOG, basically. So this is just, hey, I'm bored. I want to fight you because you look like you might be a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of characterizes him. Now, I think what people won't know is, and I don't know if we may have already touched on this, but why the Banished are on Zeta Halo, and I think this may be a good chance to tie this in and transition to Zeta Halo as well. So, why are they there, and do we know how we got there?
What I was trying to piece together, it's pretty much that whole, if you control a Halo ring, you can sort of, you're holding a gun to the universe and they have to do whatever the hell you want.
Okay.
I think the way it seems, because Zeta Halo should mostly be fixed. It's been 100,000 years of self-repair, but by the time we see it in this game, it's freshly blown up again, which is where a lot of where we'll be playing are on those blown up parts.
Right.
So with the Infinity, I don't know. It's just a guess because it wasn't in any leaks or anything. But with the Infinity gone and the ring blown up, and that scene where it shows all those deceased sort of spanning out when they're looking at the Infinity Register, I really do wonder, because Zeta Halo, like, someone sent it and it took off into place, and they don't actually really know where they are right now. So it's really disconnected from everything. But the Infinity's gone, or unknown location. Everyone on it was shown as deceased. There's a huge chunk blown up on the Zeta ring, so I'm just wondering if they just freaking crashed the ship into it.
Yeah,
that was my guess.
Yeah, because I think
that's part of the mystery right now.
I don't want to say anything about that because that was like a spoilerish thing in the Game Informer thing. Basically,
good old Game Informer.
Yeah,
there were some bad ones with the previews. Yeah, you got to be careful. Watch out, we didn't spoil anything.
Yeah, so we won't touch any spoilers from the game.
Mike, your camera's all fuzzy if you want to.
Yeah, you just got it fuzzy. You do look better, but I'm just kidding.
But it seems like there's some strong hints to what happened with the there we go. About what happened with the Infinity, but we're probably not going to go. So yeah, I agree with Jessica, because you can see in the cutscene where it has the pulse and everything goes red. It's almost like they were shooting, like the ring got shot, and they something like stopped mid explosion or something. But yeah, what's also weird is like some of the previews made it seem like the Banished were on that ring, but like reluctantly, like they didn't want to be there, but they had to be there for some reason. And it could be like what Jesse said, that just a sign of power controlling that ring.
Also, it was Cortana's headquarters. Like, she had set it as her base of power. So if you're trying to finally stop her, you need to go there, and because that's also where the UNSC was going there with the weapon, because Cortana was there. She can isolate her code before she can try and take off and go somewhere else. And using the Forerunner tech, probably its connection to domain, space magic shit. Get there, control where Cortana is, and then delete her finally. So, and I wouldn't be shocked if it was a similar thing for the Banished, because they've talked about the Harbinger, whoever that is. So they're on that ring for roughly 6 months at the start of the game. Like, what have they found? Whatever the Harbinger is, they've obviously let them out of that Silex prison. There's a lot to still figure out with the story.
Yeah, so on that point, like, and Joseph Staten said, this is the story. This is a mystery, right? The story for this game. So let's start with the things that nobody should know at this point in time. Maybe there's guesses, right? But we don't know. Huh?
I'll ping John.
Yeah. At this point, we don't know. We shouldn't know what exactly happened to Cortana since Halo 5. We don't know why everybody's deceased, or what happened to the Infinity, why the ring, or how the ring got broken, right? The Zeta Halo ring that's currently right now is broken. We kind of know why they're there, or why we would be there, right? Because you said that was to go and stop Cortana. So both sides have a reason to be there. One to just control the world, the other just try to stop Cortana. Now, we don't know what Cortana's relationship with the Banished is right now. Okay.
They fear her in the books. They don't want anything to do with her.
Okay. So
I was just going to say, I thought they might had wanted to try to recruit her, even though I don't think she would be interested. But
yeah, if they tried, they failed miserably because they're very scared of her in the books.
They did try in the books, not in the game.
No. If they did, yeah, if they had, they definitely didn't succeed because they are scared shitless of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't know. It's hard to tell because there's such a gray area. Seems like she might want the same thing that they want to overcome all of these bad factions, but not in the way that they want to do it.
She wants police and order, and the Banished are kind of the opposite of that. And so, like, for the Banished to do what they want to do, they have to get rid of Cortana too, or at least figure out some way to get around her.
Yeah. It just seems funny because it's like I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but it seems like they both want the same thing, just in different ways.
She really wants she wants galactic peace her way. Mm-hmm. They sort of want that their way, but their way is that we'll just kill you if you're not with us. And her way is I will subjugate you.
Do they really want peace, though? The Banished just seem like they don't care if there's peace.
Well, they just want to always fight. They know there wouldn't be peace. They just
peace is when they've won. That's peace.
Well, like Thanos, I think they'll go to a desert or a planet and eat some fruit, and then Thor will chop their head off.
I feel like they want like the Banished want to just keep fighting.
Yeah, they want to fight forever.
Yeah, they like to fight, and they're not looking for world. Like Cortana she's looking to destroy because she would actually be okay with everybody not fighting, and if you do fight,
she considers it collateral damage to a greater cause, as with them it's just part of it.
She's closer to Thanos, I guess, in some weird way. Right?
So she's Thanos from Infinity War, and they're Thanos from Endgame.
I was going to say, or they are the Mongols. Like, they just want to keep fighting forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Zeta Halo. So we talked about, we mentioned earlier.
There's a big history to it.
Yeah, so why don't you just kind of set the table there. Obviously, we mentioned Mendicant bias a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. We didn't really go down that hole too far.
Yeah, you can help me with this one, Mike. Yeah, because so Mendicant bias was the Ancilla AI that ran Zeta Halo. Like, he's the big boy AI on Zeta.
He ran
Halo.
their military too. He was in charge of all the original Halo rings, the Forerunner military. All of that was controlled by Mendicant.
So him going bad was very bad.
Yeah. He wasn't
always
AI.
bad.
So he wasn't. No. Yeah. So like we know 343 Guilty Spark, who's actually a character in the Forerunner trilogy book named Chakis. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a whole thing. So pretty much for that book, Chakis is a evolved human who lives on Earth, but eventually ends up on Zeta Halo, gets tortured really horribly in the Palace of Pain, and the only way to save him is to copy his brain, make him an AI, and he becomes 343 Guilty Spark, gets sent to a Halo to watch it. It's actually a really good backstory. He then comes back in the later books, and his whole journey is excellent. You should there's a lot of fucking books to read to get it all, though.
So Guilty Spark is from the Castle of Pain?
Guilty Spark was a devolved human 100,000 years ago, and then he got turned into a there's so much in that freaking trilogy book that they tied into the original games. Yeah, so Zeta Halo was like the Builder's main place. It was one of the Librarian's main places for seeding humanity and all that, so that they could take them off of there. They had their shield worlds to protect life, because they knew they were going to set the Halo rings off. All life in the galaxy that wasn't very specifically protected by them was going to die. And they had the Primordial, who was the only living precursor, and he was a real bad guy to talk to, because both the Didact and Mendicant bias over time and the friggin' builder, Master Builder Haber, were all corrupted by him. So when he pretty much convinced, and it wasn't even a corruption with Mendicant bias so much as a logical conclusion. He convinced him that the Forerunners were leading to a stagnation of life in the galaxy. Things were going to die off. They were not worthy of the mantle. We had never wanted them to have it as the precursors. It was supposed to be the humans. You should stab them in the back, and he very much did.
And like what kind of helped edge that along was whenever Medicant Bias looked into the domain and looked at all the history and the records, there was nothing contradicting what the Primordial was saying. Like everything the Primordial was saying came up true. So that just must mean that everything else that he's saying must also be true. And that was kind of like the start or the first sign of the logic plague.
Yeah, that was there's so much. The main thing with Zeta Halo is it ends up becoming this huge battle between the ISO Didact, who was the good copy of the Didact that was fighting alongside the Librarian and all them, versus the Master Builder and everything. It ends up leveling most of Zeta Halo. It's really, really badly damaged at the end of that book. And so it's taken a full 100,000 years for it to sort of get back in good shape. And that's really funny because the first time we see it in this game, it's then got huge chunks blown out of it again. So it was it was like the staging ground for an enormous battle for the end of that trilogy. And there's so much to that it could be when we finally do that book trilogy, it's going to be a long episode.
So like the thing regarding Zeta Halo, why it's so important or special, unique, is that there was originally 12 rings. Yeah, there was originally 12 rings of the original array, and they were 3 times larger than the 7 rings now, but they were weaker. And then the only surviving ring was Zeta Halo. And like Jesse said, it was so damaged, and whenever it was rebuilt, it was reformed to fit along with the second array of rings. So it was 10,000 kilometers instead of 30. It was smaller but much more powerful, but it still had a lot of the history that came before it. So, like the Palace of Pain, the Flood.
A lot of the wildlife we've seen is really neat to finally see.
Because they terraformed, or whatever, however you want to call it, they made that one look most Earth-like, because it was intended to be house humans, and also be, I don't know if it was just human DNA or a lot of the other DNA, but it also was a housing ground for the DNA constructs or history.
Yeah, they had almost everyone, it seemed like, or at least they had a lot. Like you see in the Silexes in the preview, you could see like grunts and jackals and elites and whatever the hell the Harbinger was when that one's yellow, and you could see humans. And so it was it was just one of the main places where the Librarian was trying to preserve DNA and life so that it could then go back out to the specific planets they wanted after they had murdered everything with the rings.
So it was like a petri dish for everything, right?
Yep.
So we didn't talk too much about the Librarian. I think that's maybe the only thing we missed when we went through Halo 4, right? Should people know about the Librarian? I guess she does have an important role
just like knowing what she had done on there and what her work was, why you'll see certain things. Certainly wouldn't hurt if you want to go, Mike.
I mean, she was she was basically the other half of the Didact. The Didact was like the arm force, like the section of the Forerunner. She was the kind of the other side of the coin, where she was more reason and logic and about preservation. And whenever the whole Flood, whenever they figured out that the Flood they weren't gonna win against the Flood, and they were gonna eventually shoot off the rings, one of her main goals was to collect DNA and data from all life in the universe, so that after they fire the ring, they're able to repopulate the worlds with the different animals, plants, and basically make the worlds how they were before the Flood infected them. And and like Jesse said earlier, her and the ISO Didact teamed together to double team, I guess, or betray the Urso Didact. And,
the one we saw from Halo 4.
Yeah. The original. The Didact was the original. The ISO was the like a copy of him, sort of. So a big thing with the the Forerunners was that they would mutate themselves at a certain part of their life. You'd be mutated to match your role in the society. You're going to be a builder, you're going to be a life worker, you're going to be military, you're going to be political. And then you get mutated to have traits that help you in that role. And she mutated him to just become the freaking Didact. It's just this guy who you meet at the beginning of the book. It's horrifying, but eventually he didn't really have a choice, and then he liked who he was, and he got to live a damn good life before he would have died anyways. So yeah.
So other key factors for Zeta Halo, like what are, I guess we'll just ask you more generally, like rather like what are some of the things that you think are some of the coolest facts about it, or some of the most intriguing things that you want to know more about based on what you've read, some things that stand out to each of you?
So the history behind Medicant bias, I'm hoping is referenced, or we see something, because
Cool.
Yeah, so like after this conflict that Jesse was referenced earlier, between basically the Forerunners and Faber, or the Master Builder, and Medicant bias and the Primordial, and after they basically got control back of what eventually became Delta, or I'm sorry, not Delta Halo, Zeta Halo, they put Medicant bias through a process to remove the rampancy, or reverse the rampancy, and then also broke him apart and put different parts of him in different locations for research or study, but his core is still on Zeta Halo. And they left it locked away there somewhere. So I'm hoping there's some reference to that, or I do wonder if they're going to save that for later DLC or later expansions,
because it's the size of a city. Like, his core is enormous, like a huge crystal city almost.
And there's a lot of history with him where it wouldn't really do it justice if he was just some kind of side thing. Like, I hope that he's referenced in maybe some side things throughout the world, but in order to properly reveal him or bring him into this series, I think that would require more than just like a side thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hoping there is some hints or teases towards him. Plus the Primordial, like, even though he disintegrated, I'm wondering if there's any history there, because there could be some terminals or something that show his impact, because he's got a lot of history on Zeta Halo as well.
Yeah, like sly references to the Forerunner trilogy book, where it's a little off the beaten path, so it's not like super story essential. So you can really play into that lore for us nerds. Happiness.
Yeah, because like what I keep forgetting what it's called. What is it called, Jesse? The DNA casings.
Silex.
The Silex. Yeah, like you see those in the game, and if you're not playing it, you don't know what they are, and it doesn't really matter much. But if you know what they are, it's kind of like that extra, like, ooh, like that, little.
That's
impact,
like the best way to reference the stories.
Yeah,
where it adds a little, but you didn't need it.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
So Zeta Halo, it was one of the original 12. It's the history of Medicant bias is something that I think could be explored there. What were some of the other main things in terms of like humans? Was there any sort of relation? Well, we did talk about that. You said that's where you had the cave people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they restarted the people, they started them there, not on Earth, I guess?
Well, they had to keep them off of the Earth because everything was going to get blown away by the Halo rings.
I got you.
Well,
okay.
No, actually, they're also on Earth. Earth, though, was supposed to be off limits, whereas the ones on Zeta Halo were part of the agreement.
Oh, yeah.
But they weren't having any luck with the tests from the people on Zeta. So they, behind the librarian's back, went to Earth because there was certain traits that the librarian put on the Earth human.
Gene song?
Yeah. And they were thinking maybe that's why their tests weren't successful. But it didn't matter. None of that mattered.
They had no idea that it was,
it
like
had nothing
choice on who they went after.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with anything that the librarians did with any humans. It was all because the Flood just playing mind games, basically. So yeah, and even afterwards, I don't know. After they blew up the Halo rings. I don't know if they put Earthlings back on Zeta. I know, obviously, we know they did on Earth, but we don't know if they did on Zeta Halo.
So is there any chance that there's still human life anywhere on Zeta? Or
it would have been 100,000 years, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But
yeah, because by the time they blew up the rings, that was the second array. That was the 7 rings. At that point, everything, the conflict that surrounded the original 12 rings was already done and passed. So that meant
the Forerunners were in rough shape. They were.
Yeah.
The whole mendicant bias thing is he literally he freaking just wiped out the Forerunners for the most part. He along with the flood just went in and just decimated, or not decimated, that's only 10%, obliterated their capital city and just killed everyone. So they were on their last legs when they finally set the rings on fire.
How about you, Jesse? Anything else for you that you're really interested in exploring?
I mean, Zeta Halo's backstory. Did we ever go to Zeta Halo in anything in any of the other games? I don't think we did.
Delta Halo. I really didn't even know much about it until.
I mean, it was in the books, but not in
Right.
Yeah, it got its backstory in the Forerunner trilogy, and so since reading those books, I've always been like, Jesus, it would be really cool to have a game on there. Also, it would be really cool to have a Halo that's open world and I can explore this ring with this new tech, and to have some sort of light upgrade system and all these different. And then they freaking made my dream game that I get to play in a certain amount of days. I can't say. I'm very excited. But yeah, it's so much just about the history. They've got so much history in there, and I'm hoping to find references to it if I really dig into it to find it. That'd be super nerdy exciting.
And it sounds like what's interesting about it is that it just does contain a lot of history of the entire lore. I mean, all the lore for Halo, right? The whole entire universe. So, a lot of your history. So you could really almost uncover it. You could almost use that to try to.
It's got the main basis of everything 343's done since they took over the series. It's the big thing that they built up. So going there for a game is huge.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. All right, so I think we did a good job covering 4 or 5s in the background.
You can see it gets so much more dense.
There's a lot more that I mean, everything from the creation of the flood to the relation to the primordial to all that. Yeah, there's a big rabbit hole.
Yeah, so it would be another 2 hours to kind of really go down that rabbit hole.
10.
Yeah, that's why I was asking for one. All right, so one thing each. Just what's one thing that maybe you hope to see, whether it's here or it's on some DLC. What do you hope is explored within the Zeta that about from that's touched on from the books and everything?
Basically, what I said before. I'm hoping they touch on a lot of the history. Yeah, mendicant bias, the primordial, some history of the original array. A lot of that stuff. Some stuff like mendicant bias, you can probably make expansions or additional games and stuff. But just having references to the ancient humans, because that's what retroactively looking back after you found out that the initial reveal trailer was Halo Infinite. And especially after we found out that it was based on Zeta Halo, those hieroglyphs and stuff on the walls made a lot more sense.
Right.
And that already, and stuff like that. That's all I want. Coming across a cave with those ancient hieroglyphs and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I'm hoping to see. Yeah, I would love to see the references and different stories and stuff, because there's a lot to. There's a lot to go back on.
And maybe even to find out, for me, now I'm kind of curious, what happened to all the humans they had on there, right? What happened to things over time? So we don't really know all that. Jesse, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of say about that one?
One thing I wouldn't mind if they do, because it's coming in the next book, is you could do prequelish DLC where you've already got these levels built, you can sort of rejigger things around a bit, kind of like they did with Far Cry Primal, where they had that same play area, but then you can rebuild it, and you can have like you're a Spartan on here, and it's a little more survival-ish, trying to survive, like stories that happened before Chief was able to come down and probably save the day, as I'll assume he'll do in some fashion. Like, it would be really cool to get more exploration focused and less pushing the main narrative focus. Like a more contained story for a small group could be co-op focused more than the main campaign story is going to be. You know, that I think that could be something that'd be fun. It wouldn't require as much work as creating a ton of brand new levels too.
Right. No, that's good. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, just how cool would it be? Because, like, you know, they've hinted that there's side stories or side missions or something that would be co-op that could use our multiplayer Spartans. So, like, how cool would it be if we had these side expansions that Jesse's talking about, where you're talking, because we hopefully this isn't a spoiler, sorry, but we all know that you pick up equipment from dead Spartans, right? Like, so how cool would it be if somehow the game updated once those expansions came out, that it was a side story of how these Spartans died or got to the locations that they got to, but they were your Spartan, and then when you later on played through the campaign, if you did a replay, it would be your Spartan that you found, you know, in those types of stories, sweet. You know. But
that's a neat idea, and kind of tying in what they did with Reach, right? Like, that's, you know, the Spartans that you knew they were going to die before you took it over, and
kind of how your helmet always updated in that beginning cutscene. Stuff like that. Yeah,
that'd be kind of neat. Amanda, how about you? Like, based on everything we talked about, like, what are you kind of looking forward to, you know, exploring or seeing, coming from like this standpoint, more like me, like played most of the games and things like that. What are you looking forward to the most, based on what everything Jesse and Mike have talked about?
I think I'm looking forward to seeing how the ring got to where it was. I think it would be nice if if they had terminals that showed like what happened to the people that were there, and just everything that you don't know about it. And I think it might be cool, like if they had DLC along some point where you got to play the final humans there and find out what happened to them first person. I think that would be interesting.
Be cool.
And also, she really wants co-op, because she didn't know that co-op had been delayed.
I was like, so am I taking off work on the 8th and then we can play together? And Jesse's like, no. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, we feel
not fair.
I mean, hopefully, if anything, at least I'm hoping we get some terminals or something. Because remember how in CE it had like that video that it played through of how humans died and stuff? That would be cool to kind of call back to.
They've got a whole lore tab. So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of backstory.
And that's going to be fun. So I've never been somebody who, like, when I play video games, wants to just go grab a bunch of collectibles, right? Just collect a bunch of stuff that doesn't really do a whole lot.
That could be a thing, actually, is I wonder if you beat the story, do you then get to go back to find stuff? And not have to get it all before you end. That'd be nice.
Yeah. And I think this Halo has a unique opportunity right now, because it does have just a massive lore, maybe more than any other game out there right now. I'm trying to think of anything comparable. I mean, you know, Mass Effect was pretty big, you know, had a pretty big universe, but it had a pretty self-contained story in the original 3. And
Mass Effect is probably the closest.
Yeah, and that's
you could say The Witcher, but then the games don't actually follow the book, so it doesn't count.
Right. So
Halo had a lore Bible before the game even came out. So
they focused on it a lot. They were like, we got something special here.
Yeah,
we're gonna really build this up.
They really have a lot they can explore, and so that's what's going to be fun is getting some of those collectibles that help explain stuff that's part of the expanded universe, but you don't necessarily need that to understand the story you're playing. You know, and I am curious about this mystery. It sounds pretty neat. You know, like, just, hey, where is Cortana now, and how did this break apart, and who is still alive, and what happened to them? Like, why isn't any of those other Spartans around Master Chief now? And so it's going to be really fun to kind of uncover all that. So I'm looking forward to that. The one last thing, we talked about the flood. Obviously, we had. Whoops. Sorry, my cat's knocking stuff over.
Wouldn't be an XboxEra podcast without
my cat being a jerk, looking for.
I wanted to throw one thing out. What about Cortana as the final boss?
Not yet.
Not yet. We're still working up to that.
I'm hoping, and I haven't seen anything yet, but I'm hoping that they kind of. I don't want them to. I want it to be self-contained, but I want them to still build up, to leave things that can continue to build up, and still have.
Yeah, I don't mean like final boss, like kill her. I just mean like final encounter.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Where
somewhere along the way
they find a way to not actually destroy her, and
one of the
something like that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
The Harbinger is something that's also exciting because even reading everything, I don't know anything about her.
Yeah, nothing's been even hinted at.
That is an awesome thing that we could hopefully discover during the course of the game itself. Watch, that's like Cortana in some new form.
Well, could the Harbinger be related to the Forerunners? I mean, kind of looks.
Her line in the gameplay overview is the Forerunners lies.
Yeah.
So she seems against them. Yeah.
If anything, she's probably more related to the Precursors than.
And she was in a Silex. She was captured by them and shoved in there for probably at least 100,000 years. So.
Well, the reason I was thinking is because like the Precursors supposedly look more like the Flood, right? Like they're more of that.
Well, the Primordial did, but he also like merged with other Precursors and Flood forms. Like he was part Gravemind, part like there was no real definitive definition of what the Primordial was.
Okay.
There was just like a lot of theories or whatnot. By the time he was like introduced,
and it definitely seemed like a built-in our image thing with the Forerunners and humanity and all that from the Precursors. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were humanoid-ish, and whatever the Harbinger is humanoid-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an easy way to. Yeah.
The Precursors were meant to be transient. I think beings were they would form like change their form based. That's why like they went into dust to try to avoid. Because the surviving ones are the ones that went into dust, trying to avoid the Forerunners, and that's when they were hoping that they would be able to reform from that dust after like the Forerunners takeover was complete. But then the dust got corrupt, and that dust is what basically, through a long story, not directly but through an indirect way, became the Flood spores. Yeah, there's a
so
lot
much
there.
to it.
There's a lot.
I know, man.
Like it let's just say that like infected pets were basically the precursor to the Flood.
Okay.
Like that's basically
And the Flood there's been nothing that's hinted that they would be in this game, but there's so many.
I don't think they'll be in it, but I do think they'll at least be mentioned because they're part of the Ring system.
Right, and we know they're in the Awakening, right? I like that's a spoiler. We'll just mention. So like they're obviously in Halo Wars 2, right? That's they're
that's
back.
on the Ark.
Okay,
that's on the Ark. But like, I think that transmission that revealed the Banished were on Infinite may have hinted at it because Ursula did that good breakdown, and you can see that what looked like a crack was kind of twitching, and it could have been a thin tentacle.
They keep hinting at him. I wouldn't be surprised if DLC went in that way.
That's what I'm wondering. Just like they did with Halo Wars 2, they brought him back in there that way because they have a lot, right? They have it seems like they're bringing this Harbinger. It's a brand new thing. You got all the Banished who are going to be new to a lot of people. So they might hold off right now.
You've got a lot of tools you can choose from in the future, though.
Right. So like, but we do know that that the Flood is alive and well, basically based on the Halo Wars 2 thing.
Yeah, they're still not gone.
Is there anything that, and I think maybe we'll just kind of wrap up get close to wrapping up here. But is there anything that people should know about how they came back? Because I always assumed after Halo 3, the Flood was done. Like that was my impression. So,
Yeah.
Like, please,
No, so
please be done.
that grave mind was done. But even the Flood that was on High Charity weren't all done. Like, for whatever reason, the Halo ring, maybe because it wasn't complete, didn't kill all the Flood in High Charity.
Yeah, it sort of blew itself up. And instead of setting everything up around the universe, it just sort of blew itself up on the Ark. So
yeah, and but there was still, every ring still had Flood on them. And part of one of the main missions of the Infinity was to go to these different find the Halo rings so they can decommission them. And I'm assuming during that decommission process, eliminate the Flood. And
that's when they found the composer on the one that we saw before.
Yeah. And we don't know how far they got in that on Zeta Halo. And Zeta Halo was a major spot for the Flood activity.
Yeah, like there was a lot on there.
From what I understand, there was still parts of Zeta Halo that were controlled by the Flood post explosion and everything.
So there's still other grave mines out there then, and they all have some sort of tie to the primordial. Because if there's Flood left, then there has to be a grave mine behind them.
If
right?
they've got enough food sources to make one, there's a whole process to. Because High Charity was this whole city with a ton of people in it, and so they had the fuel essentially to build one.
Yeah, and there was originally a handful of proto grave mines on Zeta Halo, but they've all been destroyed. So what's there now, we don't know. Because it's interesting, if you go into Halo 3 and you figure out which one's Zeta Halo, it's covered in a yellow fog or a cloud, and that's because the last record that the Forerunners had at that point was that the Zeta Halo was covered in this cloud or fog because of how infected it was with the Flood. But then when they later went there, it wasn't like that.
Okay. So High Charity, and for people who don't remember, High Charity was the Covenant's mobile planet.
Yeah, city
ship. Yeah. And so basically the Covenant are pretty much done there, right?
They seem donezo.
Yeah.
They're. I can't spoil Divine Wind.
Okay.
There's always splinter things in the books that sometimes play into the games.
Okay. Gotcha.
I'll leave it at that.
All right. And but we assume, most people should assume, that pretty much all the Covenant that were part of High Charity are done, and there's just Flood still living there.
And if they were still around, they're probably part of the Banished now, because that's one of the Banished things. We find people, we get them to either join us or we kill them.
Okay.
Also, for people who played 5 and are wondering what's up with Blue Team and Team Osiris, no idea. No one has any clue.
All right.
And it wasn't mentioned. It didn't. Yeah. We don't know where any of them are. We only know that it's about Chief.
So the Flood can work with a faction and not infect them. I know, briefly, they worked with the UNSC and forget which game, but
yeah, it was.
Could they work long term?
Part of 3, yeah.
Yeah,
they wanted, but they don't really want to. Yes, they could.
Don't want to.
They don't want to. Their whole thing is weird. They only worked with the UNSC for that specific moment, but the instant that they didn't have to anymore, technically, they just turned on them. Because they didn't want the rings to fire. Because that would kill their food. So they worked with the UNSC to ensure the rings couldn't fire. And then the moment that they felt confident that they wouldn't, they just turned right on them, because their primary goal is to just infect all life. So yes, they could if they ever wrote a really compassionate, nice Flood Spore into the games. Like Billy the Spore, who just wants to, look at rainbows and eat ice cream.
That would be a good character.
But why would they want to? Why would the Banished want to work with them?
They wouldn't. They
I thought. Oh, I misheard.
No, they wanted to get into High Charity to strip it of technology. And they didn't believe the Flood were in there.
I think earlier when he was talking about working with the Banished, he was talking about whatever was left of the Covenant.
Oh, yeah, the Covenant. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, whatever's left of the Covenant was...
on the Ark, I mean.
Okay, I don't know how I misheard so
Because
badly.
we've been jumping around so much.
I know so much.
But and then that's a part. I mean, I can just say that's an overall part of the Divine Wind book is like what has been happening on the Ark since the end of Halo 3, and into Halo Wars 2. So it's very good. You should read it, Mike.
Do a book club.
I got it from the library. It was they had it there, so I just got a digital copy. Libby is the name of the app, and your local library should be able to tie into it if you have a card, and then you can just request, like, all the Halo things are on there for me. That's how I normally get them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Even audiobooks sometimes, quite often, actually. You put in a request, and depending on how well funded your library is, you can generally get them to at least get one copy. And the Halo books have been so popular, they had like 4 copies of this one. Even though they're digital copies, but you know they had 4 licenses to let people borrow them for 2 weeks at a time.
Oh, nice.
And it'll connect to your Kindle apps too, folks. So you can set up Libby, and then you can set it to connect up to your Amazon account. And then if you like have a Kindle reader, you can work through that. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's a really useful app, especially if you like to read.
So, I think I feel like we covered everything that we should right now.
We've broadly covered pretty much everything.
What do you think, Amanda? Did we cover things enough so that you're prepared for Halo Infinite?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't expect that.
Because it is such a personal story in the end. You're like, okay, who are the Banished? I know. What happened with Chief and Cortana, and then you're off to the races, and everything else just adds to
I feel like I know everything now. I know it all.
We're the best.
So.
I'm no stranger to the sarcasm. No.
No, I appreciate it, guys. And girl, and it was great having this conversation to kind of get caught up on, get caught up on the story, because there is a lot going on. And like I said, I even when we came to this podcast, it was more for my love of the games, and I wasn't somebody who really got caught up in the lore. But very, very recently, I thought, well, with Infinite coming up, I'd start to dive into it a little bit, because it did sound kind of exciting listening to some people talk about it, and there is a lot going on there. And I think with your help and Daniel's as well, we're able to dive into some of the backstory, and at least get, from a high level, be able to refer to things, and just kind of knowing where the Forerunner, the Forerunner's place in all this. The Banished, and the Banished is going to be a new enemy for a lot of people who didn't play Halo Wars 2, but I think they're they could be a very interesting baddie, and hopefully hopefully their arc is extended beyond just a single game. I would expect it to be, but
I can't imagine that
they're too large
take them out.
They seem
right now they won.
Yeah, they've obviously are ingrained as the next big thing.
And even if we take them all out on Zeta, which I doubt we will, there's still a large number of them out throughout the galaxy and on the Ark. So
even the forces on the Ark are a very large amount of the Banished's power.
And there's interesting places they can take that. And then even just getting a little bit of the understanding about Zeta Halo makes me a little bit more interested to explore it, kind of knowing its importance in the Halo universe, kind of its connection to humans, its connection, hearing a little bit about Medic and Bias. So hopefully we'll get a chance to dive into those types of things. And then also the Return of the Flood. Like I said, for some reason when I beat Halo 3, I thought that we saved the world from the flood, and kind of knowing that they're still out there, and their tie-ins, trying to see what happens there, having that knowing that these things can be hovering over the entire universe, that as you go into it, knowing that there's all this backstory and this mystery, it does make it a lot more exciting. And it's like giving you some knowledge, but at the same time creating that sense of mystery, just like when we played CE. So I really enjoyed this. I definitely am more excited about exploring the story and actually continuing. I actually got some long road trips coming up here. I'm going to dive into some of the books and see.
You can be on our next book club.
Yeah, I probably will be. So,
like a 9-person book club because everyone's going to get you into the story on it.
We're all going to finally want to read it.
Everyone on the site except for Nick because he can't read.
Well, he doesn't read.
Maybe he'll do an audiobook.
Australians don't read. Yeah, or they don't even watch cutscenes for whatever reason. That's kind of weird. But that's
funny. I was producing the podcast, the main podcast, and John's playing through, and he's like, even in these first 4 levels I played through, Nick, you shouldn't skip these cutscenes. They're great. And Nick's like, I'm going to skip them.
Oh, he better. Yeah, skip those.
Well, like, what's the point of playing the game then? To just run around and shoot things?
Just for the fun action.
Oh, yeah. No,
but how do you not get lost? How do you load up a level and know what the heck you're supposed to do?
He does, but he's pretty dumb, so I don't think he realizes it.
He'll never even hear that. Oh, yeah, because he is not interested in books.
It's like you load up the level and you just go that way and shoot things until you get to the end.
No, I understand that. Honestly, I
mean, in the regular Halos.
I can relate to that. Honestly, I love.
He's gonna play the first few levels over and over again because they're more linear. That's all he'll play. He just keep restarting the game.
I can relate to missing cutscenes too, because when I played with Jesse and his brother Travis, they had played it so many times. So I'm trying to listen to the lore, the cutscenes, and I can't hear anything because they're just chatting. And I'm like, hey, so this is one reason why I'm so far behind on the story, because I couldn't hear any cutscene. So that was fun.
Well, when we know when co-op's coming out, we'll go through all of them again, and I'll be very quiet.
Well, now I can. Now I've got a fancy headset where I can just mute you guys. I couldn't do that before, but now I can. Just go boop, and then not hear you.
All right. So you think this is a good spot to kind of step off? We'll come back. I think we'll have to have a spoiler cast on the game after we all get a chance.
We have a show the day after the game comes out. If everyone no life that we can do it then.
We should give people some time. They're not going to
go through the spoiler.
But yeah,
I give it a couple weeks.
Yeah, once we all beat the game, it's going to be interesting to see, especially when we all have time to dive into it and explore it. It's going to be interesting to see how much of what we're hoping to see and how much they do end up showing and where the story goes.
So Christmas is on the 25th. Obviously, people are going to be is a Saturday, so people will be really busy around that time. We'd probably be smart to do maybe another pre-recorded podcast then, as we're live mostly for it, and maybe then. That's a good 3 weeks or so. And pre-recording allows us to really dive into it and not read chat all the time.
Yeah. We'll see. Give people a couple of weeks. We'll do
present to the community. Gracious present.
You're nothing if not gracious.
But it's going to be exciting. There's a lot of places that can take this, and especially for this ongoing game. I'm interested to see an ongoing campaign and just all the spin-offs and things like that, because it just gives them a lot of excuses to come with all types of content. I'll be interested to see what they do with these different regions on the Halo ring, if they kind of make them focused on different areas, of the story. But I guess we'll wait and see. And then once we get a chance to play it, we'll tie that back into what we talked about today, and see how many answers we have and how many questions we still have, from where we're going to start at. But with that, I think it's a good time to sign this off. Mike, do you want to do the sign off today?
Yeah, sure. We have other episodes of You Had Me at Halo, so definitely check those out if this is the first time you're tuning in. We also have a awesome website and a related YouTube channel that has a lot of awesome content that we put on daily. We also have a Patreon that if you feel generous and would like to sign up for a Patreon, that would be absolutely awesome. And an awesome forum we have a really, really diverse community, a lot of different opinions. We don't just cover Xbox. It's primarily Xbox, but we're welcoming all, and we are huge.
Not Ouya people.
Yeah, but a lot of Halo fans. So if you're a Halo fan, you're going to find a lot of cool people on our forums, and yeah, we're just a bunch of awesome and very humble people.
Don't forget
we are XboxEra pretty much everywhere too now. The only one we're not is Twitch, which is the XboxEra, but everywhere else, if you just look up XboxEra, you will find us. And it's all linked at the top of our website.
Also, don't forget about the book. If you've come into Halo or Xbox,
that's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
As we're recording this, the Kickstarter is tomorrow. It's very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, so the Kickstarter is still going to go on whenever this airs. So if you have not checked it out, definitely take a look at the Kickstarter.
Yeah,
we'll have it linked everywhere.
So basically, it's going to be it's kind of a. I'm trying to think of the snapshot of this. Basically, it's a kind of a love letter to the initial, the thing that started it all, right?
OG
the original
Xbox.
And it's going to have every single game in there. It's going to have some incredible. It's going to have
pre-drags artwork.
Yeah, the incredible art in there. It's going to have pictures
contributions
of the different games
from people in the industry.
Yeah, contributions from. Yep, YouTube. Some of the bigger YouTubers, some people in the media.
Jeff Grubb, Randolph Thor, Clobberl, Colt Eastwood, lots. Miles Dompierre.
Yeah, so it's
even us. Even we'll get to write a little bit. We'll have our own little section.
Yeah, but yeah, it's gonna be dedicated to celebrating the 20 years. But it's really gonna focus on the OG Xbox, and the quality is up there. So just take a look at it. Yeah, and I think it'll speak for itself once you get a chance to do that. But yeah, thank you everybody who decided to tune in over the Thanksgiving holidays or sometime after. If you just decided, hey, I'm checking out all this Halo hype and I want to check out the franchise for the first time.
Or if I messed up and published it early.
Yeah, but which is fine. But anyways, we appreciate everybody who continues to tune in with us. And when we do come back next week, if there's anything that we did not address, which is lots, because there's so much, that you would have liked to have seen us covered more or gone deeper on, put those questions in our forum, and we'll make sure that we'll touch
we'll have
on
a thread
those
up for that show.
Yep, and we will cover that in the very next show. So
follow-up lore show.
All right, everybody. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.